Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our first registry open house. This evening, we'll be discussing the PKU Patient Registry's newest research initiative, our genetic testing program. This project's been about a year in the making, so we're very excited to have it up and running and helping the PKU community. We're very fortunate tonight to have two wonderful speakers. Dr. Susan Berry serves on the NPKUA Board of Directors and is the principal investigator of the PKU Patient Registry and our genetic testing program. She's a nationally recognized geneticist and expert in inborn errors of metabolism at the University of Minnesota. She also has an extensive professional background in rare disease registries as the leader of the NIH-funded Urea Cycle Disorders Consortium longitudinal study and the NIH and HRSA-funded Inborn Errors of Metabolism Collaborative. Dr. Berry's research focuses on long-term follow-up for newborn strange conditions like PKU, and she's very passionate about providing and improving care for adults and families living with inborn errors of metabolism. Our second speaker is Dr. Stephanie Sacharow, and she is a medical geneticist at Boston Children's Hospital and director of the Dr. Harvey Levy program for PKU and related conditions and the PAL clinic. She also serves on the NPKUA Registry Advisory Committee, and her expertise was integral in moving the registry genetic testing program forward and some of our other initiatives. She values the interactions with her patients and families in the PKU community. For this webinar, just to give I'm not seeing on my screen. Okay, here we go. Just to give a quick overview of what we'll be discussing today, Dr. Sacharow will be starting, and she's going to give a brief overview of the genetics of PKU, the general genetic testing process, and then the importance of genetic testing from the research perspective. We'll then transition over to Dr. Berry, and she will be sharing the impact of genetic testing from a clinical perspective, and then give a brief overview of our genetic testing program and our registry. We've saved plenty of time at the end for discussion, so please feel free to enter in any questions you have for the presenters into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And with that, I will turn things over to Dr. Sacharow.
Hi, it is such a pleasure to be with you today. All right, so we are going to start today by talking about the genetics of PKU. So just a little bit of background on genes. We sometimes talk of genes as being a blueprint, and a blueprint for every characteristic or trait that we possess, such as our eye color and our height and other things that run in our family. So basically, our genes contribute to our own uniqueness as individuals. But genes also have roles helping the body to manufacture what it needs to carry out normal functions of the body. So genes provide instructions to make specialized proteins that are called enzymes involved in metabolism. Sometimes a gene can have a variant in the sequence of letters or base pairs that make up the genetic code. And so variants can alter how the enzyme works. So with a mild variant, the enzyme for PKU can be slightly or somewhat reduced, and with a more severe or classic variant, the enzyme can be low or close to zero. So PKU is, as we all know, an inherited condition caused by variants in the gene called PAH, which stands for phenylalanine hydroxylase. But rarely there are other genes associated with an increased phenylalanine level that might come up on newborn screening or with biochemical testing. So there is a list here of some of the more rare genes, including DNA JC12, GCH1, PCBT1, PTS, QDPR, SLC25A13, and SPR. So the next question is, how is PKU inherited? So we're going to review this. For most genes, children will inherit 2 copies of that gene, one from their mother and one from their father. So that's what we're seeing in the graph here. We're seeing that each of the parents has 2 different variations in the gene. That's why there's 2 different colors behind each parent. So when you have a condition that's autosomal recessive, such as PKU, then the affected individual has a disease-causing variants in both copies of the gene and doesn't have a normal copy of the gene. So if we're assuming that having the green color is having enzyme activity that's adequate and having the white color is having low enzyme activity, then this shows the possible outcomes of what would happen with two parents that are both carriers. So they could both pass on their gene copy that is working properly. And so with two of the green colors, then that would be an unaffected individual. And then there would be a chance that one could pass on the working gene and one could pass on the non-working gene copy. And so those children would be carriers like the parents and be unaffected. So the two children that you see in the bottom, those are denoted as being carriers. Whereas a child who inherits both non-working gene copies would be affected with the condition. And so basically a 1 out of 4 chance with carrier parents of a child being affected, 1 out of 4 chance of being unaffected and not even a carrier, and a 50% or 1 out of 2 chance for the children of carrier parents to also be carriers, but be unaffected with the condition. So this slide shows how is PKU inherited when you have one carrier parent and one affected parent. So we're going to flip the colors and have the green color denote somebody who has PKU, and the green and the white as somebody who is a carrier of PKU. So this is definitely something that I encounter in clinic. I've had some adult patients with PKU who are interested in knowing what the chance is of having a child with PKU. And so then they have the partner tested to see if their partner is also a carrier. And if their partner is a carrier of PKU, then these are the possible outcomes for their child. So the individual with PKU only has the copy of the gene for PKU with the variant. They don't have an unaffected gene copy to pass on. So what you would see with the combinations of the parent who is affected passing on the affected gene copy and the carrier parent having a 50% chance of passing on the affected gene copy is basically a 50% or 1 in 2 chance of their child having PKU, and a 50% chance of, or 1 in 2 of their child being a carrier of PKU, but unaffected. So next, a little bit about the genetic testing process. So genetic testing is used to determine the precise genetic cause of somebody's PKU and can also help determine if people are carriers of PKU. So genetic testing has traditionally been done on blood samples, but more recently we've had the ability to do many genetic tests on DNA that come from saliva and sometimes from cheek swab samples, from swabbing the loose cells on the inside of your cheek. So using one of these samples, in this case, we're talking about saliva and blood samples, PAH and the other genes that I mentioned in the previous slide, all can be evaluated to determine which changes in the DNA sequence, or in other words, which variants are reducing or eliminating a person's ability to metabolize the amino acid phenylalanine. And so when we look at a group of genes at the same time, it's called a gene panel. And when we do a gene panel, it's usually looking at genes that all cause something that is similar in a way, and often those genes are related to each other. So in this case, the gene panel is looking for genes that cause elevated blood phenylalanine. So once the sample is received, it generally takes around 2 to 3 weeks for the laboratory to run the test and then finish their analysis of the data. And when results are available, people can meet with their doctor or with a genetic counselor to discuss the results and the implications that they could have for you as an individual, but also for your family. So what can I learn from genetic testing is a question that you might be wondering right now. So prior to having genetic testing, we would like for you to understand what the possible results can be and what it might mean for you and your family ahead of time. So these are some possible findings from genetic testing in general. So sometimes we find what is called a pathogenic variant. And so that is a change in a gene that is known to cause a condition. In this case, we're looking for genes having to do with PKU and hyperphenylalaninemia, meaning high Phe in the blood. So in most cases, genetic testing in people with PKU and hyperphenylalaninemia is going to identify two different pathogenic variants. One would have come from their mother and one from their father. Rarely we might just see that there's one pathogenic variant. So that doesn't mean that the person is unaffected, but it could mean if they're affected when we look at their biochemical testing, it could mean that the second variant just wasn't picked up using the current test with the current technology. And so people would still be managed based on their biochemical blood tests and their signs and symptoms. We do warn people ahead of time when they do genetic testing that sometimes we might find something that's called a variant of uncertain significance. And so that means that there is a change in the gene from what most people have, but it's not known for sure if that particular variant would alter your body's phenylalanine metabolism. So it may not be known for sure if that variant would cause PKU or hyperphenylalanemia. So when that happens, we will often revisit that over time until we better understand it, and more information may become available with the passage of time. And then it is also possible to have incidental findings. So we're doing the test for a reason, to look for something specific, but sometimes we might find something that we're not necessarily looking for, that's not related to the condition that we're testing for. So for example, in the National PKU Alliance's genetic testing program, they're looking at 8 genes associated with elevated blood phenylalanine. But incidental carrier status can be revealed. So it's possible someone might have 2 pathogenic variants in one gene, and then in one of the other genes, they might have a single pathogenic variant. So they could be affected with the condition from the first gene and actually also be a carrier with the second gene. So that's a kind of unanticipated finding, and even though it wouldn't affect the individual, if they're just a carrier only for the second condition, that is something that they could keep in mind because it could be passed on to future generations. Another type of incidental finding that could come out of genetic testing, particularly if you're looking at a family within the context of genetic testing, it's possible to find out from testing that the mother of the child is not the biological mother, or the father is not the biological father. So that's called non-maternity or non-paternity. So there can be previously unknown information. It could have to do with family relationships or adoption or other relationships, but that is a type of incidental finding that can come out with genetic testing. So how does genetic testing impact research? So genetic testing is very important for many different forms of research. We'll give you a couple examples of this. So one of the types of approaches that is part of some research studies now is called gene therapy. And within the realm of gene therapy is gene editing. So gene therapy is a medical approach to treating disease by correcting the underlying genetic problem. So if someone has a non-working gene that is supposed to manufacture an enzyme, then it's a way to give back the gene that is not working in that individual. So as an example, an approach to gene therapy could be gene addition. So you can add a working copy of the PAH, or phenylalanine hydroxylase gene, to liver cells. So adding a working copy of the gene to the cells of the liver. And gene editing would encompass a normal copy of the gene replacing the altered copy in the cells in the liver. So for both treatments, it's important to confirm the variants in the PAH gene are the cause of the elevated blood phenylalanine levels. So all participants in this type of research have to undergo genetic testing. It's also possible that their precise genetic variants could be considered. So if someone had a type of variant called a null mutation, it's possible that they might even be at higher risk with certain therapies, such as gene therapy. If they're making zero enzyme on both copies of their gene, then their body's never actually been exposed to the PAH enzyme before. So that is something important to know for research purposes. So how else does genetic testing impact research? Well, there are other clinical trials besides the gene therapy type trials where the genotype is also very valuable. So one of the examples we're mentioning on this slide is a company called PTC Therapeutics, who is doing a study called Affinity, and the genetic testing results are potentially playing a role in this investigational product or this medication that they're trying. So PTC Therapeutics is looking at this potential new medication for the treatment of PKU, and that medication is called sepiapterin. And so they have already done a phase 2 trial, and this medication achieved a statistically significant and clinically meaningful reduction in blood Phe levels. And so the next trial is assessing safety and efficacy of sepiapterin, and they're also exploring if the precise genetic cause of a patient's PKU can also predict response to the new drug. So how does genetic testing impact research overall? So I mentioned that gene therapy and PTC study on sepiapterin, these are considered interventional studies, meaning that there's an intervention such as a new medication or procedure as a potential new treatment. But there are also observational studies which can benefit from having the patient's genetic testing done. So in these studies, there are researchers that are observing participants who are on their current treatment plan, and they can track the health outcomes for those individuals. So one of the examples of that is the PKU patient registry through the NPKUA. And another example is the Fee-Free Consortium. They have a longitudinal study. So for both of these, investigators are collecting information on genetic variants that cause a patient's PKU, along with other information such as medical history, treatment, diet, and blood phenylalanine levels. So then the data can be analyzed, and it can determine if certain variants in the genes or combination of variants are associated with certain manifestations, or in this case, certain symptoms in individuals with PKU. And so if the patterns are identified, it can help to facilitate a more personalized approach to treatment and management overall for individuals with PKU.
Dr. Bear, you're actually on mute.
Thank you, Stephanie, and I apologize. I turned my my sound off because I was trying to be all discreet and then was too discreet. My apologies for that. But now we're going to turn a little bit to the clinical perspective of PKU, and I want to talk to you a little bit in more detail. Hopefully most of you are familiar with the registry, but just to review. So perhaps next slide, Lauren. All right. Well, Dr. Sacharow has already given you some kinds of ideas about how genetic testing is important with regard to supporting research in PKU. But of course, genetic testing is an important component of follow-up care for people who screen positive for PKU on newborn screening. And because of the importance and utility of having genetic testing, the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics has recommended genetic testing in people with PKU to support therapy planning. It turns out that having a precise cause of PKU, a precise genetic cause, can help doctors predict whether a patient will respond to Kuvan, a very important medication that can be used for people with this condition. And it's impossible to predict which symptoms a person with PKU will have based on their precise genetic character. In some cases, it can help us guess or have some idea of how severe the PKU will be. Dr. Sacharow mentioned that some people have what's called a null mutation, that's that they don't make any phenylalanine hydroxylase. Well, somebody in that situation is likely to have more challenges in managing their PKU than someone who has some enzyme activity with a different kind of genetic change. Next slide. It seems that genetic testing is important in a number of arenas, and we feel that will certainly impact care in the future. Now, Dr. Sacharow talked to you about the research perspective, and it's certainly a critical element to have gene testing in studies or research activities that have a focus on gene therapy. But those therapies currently aren't something that's available for treatment for PKU. However, the whole purpose of doing these kinds of research trials, the whole opportunity, the whole reason to take them on is that they then can move into a clinical setting. And at that point, genetic testing will have an even larger role in the medical management of PKU. So we'll be that much further ahead if you know your genetic character for PKU. Next slide. Now, a final set of very important people that are impacted with regard to genetic testing are your family. Because this is a genetic condition, Dr. Sacharow showed you how people can inherit the trait for having PKU and how a double dose of that abnormal gene results in an infected person. And that means that this genetic testing can have implications for the whole family. For example, if you find the disease-causing variants, this can aid in family planning for both the affected person and their relatives, because once the familial variants are known, many reproductive options become available, including in vitro fertilization with pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or prenatal diagnosis through amniocentesis or chorionic villus sampling. So there's tests that can be done to determine before a baby's born if they've inherited the PKU pair of genes. Knowing the familial variant will also allow targeted testing for other family members to know their own risks of having passed on an altered gene to future children. And so in some cases, that's a good way to provide reassurance for non-carrier relatives. Next slide. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about our genetic testing program. I hope you all know at this point that our National PKU Alliance works to improve the lives of families and individuals affected by PKU while ultimately seeking a cure. That's our big goal. Given the importance of genetic testing in PKU research and in care, developing a new program to increase access to genetic testing in the PKU community was very closely aligned with the organization's missions. So in our new genetic testing program, we offer free genetic testing and genetic counseling to adults who face a financial barrier to testing and who reside in the US. Through our program, participants can not only learn what learn vital personal information about their PKU, but can also help advance research that could lead to better treatments or a cure. Next slide. So we have some eligibility criteria for accessing the free genetic testing. And during this initial phase, we're offering testing to people who meet these criteria. First, of course, one must have a diagnosis of PKU. We want to be able to offer this test to persons affected with the condition. Because of the nature of how we have to offer the testing, I'm sorry, but we have to limit this at this moment to persons who reside in the US. We need to have the person who is going to have this free testing be enrolled in our PKU patient registry with surveys completed or updated. And most importantly, we're trying to make sure that we spread our resources as effectively as possible. So we're primarily looking for people who have a financial barrier to testing. What may mean is, for example, if your insurance just won't pay for genetic testing, the testing is expensive enough, that might be an example of that kind of financial barrier. In this particular program, it's going to require that someone who participates is 18 years or older, needs to be an adult, and is able to provide their own consent to testing. Now, we know that genetic testing is an important component of care for all individuals for PKU. So as we grow the program, we're truly hoping to open testing to a broader population. But for right now, these are the rules that we're going to have to follow on, at least on the short term. Next slide, please. All right, ready to participate. This is the best part. For those of you who might be interested in participating, we'll need to have you take the following steps to enroll in the program and move forward with the genetic testing. First of all, we'll ask you to contact our study coordinator, Lauren, who's on the program with us tonight, and she will be able to help you out. Please reach out to her by email or telephone. We'll make sure you have her contact information. She'll send you study documents, including a letter for you, a letter for your doctor who has to order this. This is a medical test, so a doctor has to order it, and a study brochure to read a little bit more about that. You're also welcome to reach out and talk to her at any stage of this to answer questions or request guidance. Our second step will be to join the PK registry or log in if you already have an account. I hope you do, at pkuimrare.org. We want you to complete and update all the registry surveys. And because as Dr. Sacharow mentioned, in natural history studies, it's really helpful to examine genetic testing results in the context of other information such as medical history, treatment, diet, and more, as we have asked you to share by participating in the registry. For the test results to have the most impact in our PKU research, which was one of the reasons we're asking people to participate, we want to make sure your information in the registry is complete and accurate and up to date. The third step will be to take the clinician letter to your doctor so they can initiate the enrollment process. Because genetic testing can impact medical management, we felt it was important to work closely with your personal care team. Now, in step 4, Lauren will send you the study's informed consent document, which is an important component of all research studies. You'll receive the documents through a HIPAA-compliant DocuSign that's user-friendly and will protect your privacy, which is very important to us in all aspects of this research. We'll ask you to review and electronically sign the consent form to move forward with testing. Once we have your consent form, we'll contact your doctor so your doctor can order the test. Now, step 5 is actually getting the collection kit. And remember, Dr. Sacharow mentioned that you can do blood or saliva tests. And in this case, the sample collection will come to your home, and this will be provided using a saliva sample. It'll contain all the instructions you need to be able to do this, and it will have a addressed prepaid envelope to send the kit back to the testing laboratory. Now, once the lab receives your sample, the genetic testing results should be available with 10 days to 3 weeks, somewhere in that range. After those results are received, you'll meet with your doctors or a genetic counselor to get those results. And free genetic counseling is available. Not every PKU care team necessarily has a genetic counselor available, so we want to make sure that that would be available to you as well. And so free genetic counseling is available through this program, or your doctor can share and talk through those results with you as you prefer. Next slide. So a little bit about the PKU patient registry, a activity that's near and dear to my personal heart, which I think is one of the most important things that has happened for the PKU community to advance care amongst that group. So the registry was actually launched in January of 2017 through a partnership through the NPKUA and the National Organization for Rare Diseases, or NORD. Some of you may be familiar with that organization as well. The registry is very special because it's patient-driven, and it's web-based to make it easy to access, and allows patients and families that are impacted by PKU to share their health data and experience in living with the condition to help shape the future of care for PKU. Now, though the registry is a research initiative, the National PKU Alliance does not intend to do the research ourselves. That's not our activity. Rather, we connect our participants and get this data into the hands of qualified investigators who can help our program have the most impact. It's a profound resource, and believe me, it is much valued. By cultivating those collaborations with researchers, scientific researchers, and industry, regulators who are helping bring drugs to market, clinicians and patients and families, we want to drive efforts that prioritize your voice, the patient's voice, advance research, and improve quality of care. Next slide. So how does the registry work? So to be a part of the registry, all you have to do is visit pkuyamrare.org on the web. This is hosted on a special platform provided by the National Organization for Rare Diseases, by NORD, and it's cloud-based, and it has what we hope will be an engaging and user-friendly interface. All of your participation, enrollment, informed consent, and data collection is self-initiated. That means we ask you to enter the information so you can know that it's accurate and reflects the truth for you and your PKU. And it comes into a secure website that is very highly protected in terms of access. To join the registry, you can actually access this website anywhere with any internet connection, and then you register and create a password protected account. You can add a participant, and that is the person who created the account, either an adult with PKU or the care provider for a child with PKU. We ask you a few general questions about the person with PKU and ask you to complete an informed consent document that describes the nature of the research that you are going to be participating in. We want you to voice your experience. Once the enrollment process is complete, you can begin to complete those surveys. And once you've joined the registry and completed surveys, this will allow researchers to have a snapshot of what life like PKU is like on a particular day, the day you answered. When you regularly update these surveys, the information begins to paint the picture of how PKU impacts your life over time. Continued participation is really, really important to better understanding of PKU. This is going to help the researchers, the doctors, the drug developers, and ultimately, of course, the purpose for this is to help people living with PKU. Next slide. Okie dokie. There we go. All right. So over the last 5 years, the registry has united a lot of people that are interested and want to know more about PKU around a common initiative, and for that reason has quickly grown into the NPKU's one of our biggest assets, one of the things that we think will help people with PKU most effectively as an organization. Because of this registry, we've moved therapies and other research findings from bench to bedside more quickly by supporting recruitment for now 31 separate academic and industry studies. We've been able to assist in the development of patient-centered clinical trials through data sharing collaborations, using the data contributed by our participants to move research forward. We've improved the quality of care by contributing to the body of evidence used to reassess and improve the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics guidelines for the management of PKU, now based in part on the patient's voice collected in our registry. And importantly, we're incorporating the patient's perspective, your perspective, into our organization's programs and research agenda. We're truly grateful for the partnership of our dedicated registry network and participants, and we really look forward to working together to further unleash the true power of this initiative. So we hope that you will consider participation in the genetic testing program and in the registry. Next slide. All right. So if you have questions or you want to participate, all you need to do is contact Lauren. We'll make sure that you have that information. I think we were going to put that in the chat, maybe, the phone number and Lauren's email, or you can reach directly into the website, pku.imrare.org. All right. So we'll shut down the slides and we're going to open the floor for questions.
Yeah. So as Dr. Berry said, we're going to open up the floor to questions. If you have any, you can type them either in the chat or the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We do have one question, and it's about the genetic testing program, Dr. Berry, so I'll let you answer that one. We had a question about how the testing is covered and who is sponsoring the testing.
Okay, and that's a very important thing. So I do want to make that crystal clear. If you are eligible based on the criteria that we've said, and one of those is that there is a financial barrier, then the test is provided and paid for by the NPKUA. This is the distribution of resources by the organization that they felt was so important to improving the care for PKU that they wanted to make that available as broadly as possible. Initially, this testing is going to be focused on people who have financial barriers to testing. And again, you have to be an adult and consent to the process. We're happy to work through with you what eligibility is and to do everything we can to facilitate it. If your insurance will pay for it, then it's probably best if it goes through insurance. But we want to make sure that as many people as possible do have access to this. And so this is designed to help with regard to people who have financial limitations.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Berry. Our next question is about research. So this will be for you, Dr. Sacharow. Somebody was just asking for some clarity around gene therapy and more about kind of how the null mutations might impact risk.
Okay. So the idea of gene therapy is that they are replacing the gene that isn't working properly. And so a lot of people with PKU have some enzyme activity. And so if their body is making even a little bit of enzyme, or the enzyme is shaped a little bit differently, so it doesn't work quite the right way, then it's something that your body has been exposed to. So just the thought theoretically is that if somebody is receiving an enzyme, even if it's a human enzyme, if their body has never experienced that enzyme because they have null mutations, which knocks out the entire enzyme activity, the question is if the body would treat it like it's a foreign body and if it would produce antibodies to it. So with gene therapy, if you are making antibodies to the gene therapy with the human gene, then you might be more likely to inactivate it. But also there would be the question of whether there could be more of a reaction if your body has never been exposed to that enzyme before.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Sacharow. The next question relates to clinical care. So I'll send this one to you, Dr. Berry. There was a question on if insurance usually covers genetic testing.
Well, it kind of depends on where you are, what insurance you have. Some states, for example, Medicaid never pays for any genetic testing. In other states, they've recognized the importance and utility of genetic testing, so it does. I would say that genetic testing, for better or for worse, is honestly more commonly paid for in children, but we've run into a lot more difficulty in getting adults genetic testing paid for. And so I wish I could tell you if it does usually or not, but it's very difficult to predict. And that's something that your own doctor or local clinic may have a better sense for. I'm really thrilled because in our area, our insurance people are pretty darn good about it, but it is not universally available. This next one I think is also from me.
Yeah, Dr. Berry, I was going to send this one to you since it's also on insurance. There was a question about if somebody were to ask insurance about genetic testing, I guess, what type of genetic testing should they ask for? I guess, how should they get more information on coverage for the test?
It depends again on the program that you work with. In some cases, there are genetic counselors that are associated with the program that assist in looking for you on their behalf about genetic testing. But the other option is to reach out directly or look in your coverage information about whether genetic testing is covered. In some cases, they require certain qualifications. And in many cases, when you have a known diagnosis that has genetic implications, that's enough, but not always. And again, I wish I could tell you that there was an easy answer that all you have to do is look here and that's what you'll know. But it really depends on insurance to insurance. The kind of genetic testing that is often done because of pregnancy is a more general one. It's looking for other problems. And most commonly looking for a different amount of chromosome material or other causes of genetic difficulty. The testing for PKU is very specific, looking for genetic errors in genes that cause PKU, most commonly phenylalanine hydroxylase deficiency. So this is what is referred to, if you're asking your insurance company, a specific gene panel for genes that cause PKU. So you have to call your insurance.
I think that was all of our questions. So that we can wrap up the webinar. My contact information is in the chat. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, please reach out to me and I can either respond or pass them on to Dr. Berry and Dr. Sacharow. But we really appreciate you attending tonight, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much for listening to us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.